Welcome to Fly Nubian Queen Network, the network for melanated people like you. I am your host, Mary Dean Esquire, here at thewallstreetlawyer.com. And today I'm coming to you live with some breaking news, talking about the two Black men who were exonerated or about to be exonerated on tomorrow from their conviction. Two men convicted of killing Malcolm X will be exonerating after spending decades in prison. The 1966 convictions of the two men are expected to be thrown out after a lengthy investigation, validating long-held doubts about who killed our beloved civil rights leader, Malcolm X. So come in here. As you come in, let me go into the comments. Drop your B1, drop your B1, drop your B1. If you find that little black fist, throw that in the chat so you can see my fist. Drop your B1 so we know where you're coming from. But we are covering some breaking news today. And I want to know, how does this make you feel? Because on the one hand, we can say that the people who they accused of killing Malcolm X are not guilty, right? They're about to throw out the conviction after them spending the decades in prison. Maybe a combined 42 years between the two gentlemen. One of them is dead now. The other one is 83 years old. So I want to know, how does that make you feel? While on the one hand, you say we want to celebrate this man's freedom, but he has truly lost his life. And so we're going to get into the story, but I want you to come in here and drop your B1. We have Dolores Smoke, who says she likes this. Yes, I like it too. I like it too. And I'm an optimist. I don't want to be negative. I get on my negative. You don't want to be negative about it. And this is nothing but positivity and all love when we see a Black man get justice. But it's a little too late. I won't say it's definitely a little too late for one brother, because one of the brothers, as we know, is he's no longer with us. He's not even living to see his name be cleared. And the other man, he is still living, but he is 83 years old. So let me get into this story. I want you to drop your B1. I'm going to throw you up here. Everybody coming in here, drop your B1. Drop your B1, fist pal. Hello. But drop your B1 and tell me okay, we got Baltimore in the house. Tell me what city you're from. Because I love seeing where all of my beautiful Black people are on the different parts. So remember to subscribe to Fly Nubian Queen Network, the network for melanated people like you. If you are looking to grow your business, please check out flynubianbusiness.com. If you're looking to better manage your money, please check out flynubianmoney.com. You can always find me, Mary Dean Esquire, here online at thewallstreetlawyer.com. And so we're going to get into this story. I had to cover this because we all love Malcolm X. I mean, if you're a Black person, you tend to fall into one of two categories. Either you are Malcolm X or Martin Luther King, or maybe you're me and you're a little bit of both because you know how to play the game. But Black people tend to fall either I'm Malcolm X or I'm Martin. And a lot of people, you hear some rap artists will say, I'm more Malcolm than Martin, and whatever. So however you side with that. But for those of you that are Malcolm X fans and that prescribe to be more Malcolm than Martin, this you will maybe make you feel good. At least you say some justice is coming to light about the case. So let's get into it. Okay. So we have two men found guilty of the assassination of Malcolm X are expected to have their convictions thrown out on Thursday, which is tomorrow. The Manhattan district attorney and lawyers for the two men said, rewriting the official history of one of the most notorious murders of the civil rights era. For decades, historians have cast doubt on the case against the two men, Muhammad A. Aziz and Khalil Azam, who each spent more than 20 years in prison. Their exoneration represents a remarkable acknowledgement of grave errors made in a case Towering importance. The 1965 murder of one of America's most influential and I'm saying beloved Black leaders in the Black community. It is long overdue, said Brian Stevenson, a civil rights lawyer and the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative. This is one of the most prominent figures of the 20th century who commanded enormous attention and respect, and yet our system failed. A 22-month investigation conducted jointly by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and lawyers for the two men found that prosecutors in two of the nation's premier law enforcement agencies, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the New York Police Department, had withheld key evidence that, had it been turned over, would likely have led to the men's acquittal. The two men, known at the time of the killing as Norman 3X Butler and Thomas 15X Johnson, spent decades in prison for the murder, which took place on February 21st, 1965, when three men opened fire inside the crowded Audubon Ballroom in Manhattan as Malcolm X was starting to speak. Oh, Lord. Take a breath. But the case against them was questionable from the outset. And in the decades since, historians and amateur investigators have raised doubts about the official story. Let me pause and come over here and ask you guys, how many of you have actually seen the documentary on Netflix? The documentary, Who Killed Malcolm X? If you've seen it, drop it down in the chat and tell us what you thought of this documentary. We got New Orleans in the house. Tell me what you think of the documentary. We got B1 Arizona in the house. Okay. I'm giving y'all some shout outs because if you have seen it, that documentary, tell us what you think. But the documentary is what sparked this investigation into this. It brought all this new evidence to light. It was what made them open up the case again. So tell me what you thought about the documentary. I'm going to get back into this story. Okay. The review. Okay, where was that? The review, which was undertaken as an explosive documentary about the assassination and a new biography, renewed interest in the case. I was just talking about that. That's the documentary that is on Netflix. If you have not seen it, make sure you check it out. It's on Netflix. And even in the documentary, they did not identify who prosecutors now believe really killed Malcolm X. Some people say they did. I hear missed comments online. I watched it once a while ago, but I'm going back to watch it again in light of this new evidence and the case being thrown, the convictions being overturned. Those who were previously implicated but never were arrested are dead. Nor did it uncover a police or government conspiracy to murder him. That's interesting. So this is, I looked up the skin color of the producers, the top billing producers who brought this story to light. And you look at their skin color, and then I'm not surprised when it says, nor did it uncover, the documentary did not uncover any police or government conspiracy to murder him. So that's very interesting because I'm pretty sure, and I did see that they did have two other Black women producers on the film. So I don't want to discount those sisters. I want to give them their props. But I wonder if we were at the very top, would we have addressed the police or government conspiracy that may have, because let me get into this article because it comes out a little bit more further on down the line. But these are the two men who were released. I want to show you that. But then I want to get it back to why we're really interested in the story. And that is because of our beautiful brother, Malcolm X. So I wanted to highlight him. I want you guys to see him because he is the reason we are even discussing, what it is. And I want to, anytime that I can honor this man who gave of himself, gave of his life, gave to his community, put his life on the line for the community, even though he had a wife and small children. I want to give this man, I cannot not give this man his roses or his pops. So we'll add his image up here. I'm gonna drop your B1 for those of you who are in the chat. Let me know where you're from. We got Tiffany Cates from Las Vegas, Nevada, in the house. Okay. So we're gonna go get back into this article because I'm very excited to talk about some black men who were they're having their convictions overturned. While our black brothers get so much negative publicity in the media, it is really humbling, and I'm excited to say that these particular brothers, they did not do it. So the man Mahahid, I might be butchering his name, God forgive me, Mahahid Abdul Halim was also found guilty, and his conviction stands. At the trial, he actually confessed. Now, don't ask me how they got these other two convictions when this man confessed to the murder, but has said then and consistently said and has maintained that the other two men were innocent. At his home in Brooklyn on Thursday, Mr. Halim, who is now 80, offered a simple response to the news about his co-defendants. God bless you, they're exonerated, he said in a quiet voice. The acknowledgement by Cyrus R. Vance Jr., the Manhattan DA, who is among the nation's most prominent local prosecutors, recast one of the most painful moments in modern American history. And at a time when racism and discrimination in the criminal justice system are once again the focus of a national protest movement, it reveals a bitter truth. That two of the people convicted of killing Malcolm X, black Muslim men, hastily arrested and tried on shaky evidence, were themselves victims of the very discrimination and injustice that he denounced in language that was echoed across the decades. In an interview, Mr. Vance apologized on behalf of law enforcement, which he said it failed the families of the two men. These failures, he said, could not be remedied. But what can we do? But what we can do is acknowledge the error, the severity of the error. They can do more. They can do more. I think that now that this has come out, that a civil litigation needs to be launched, and he needs to at least try to get some coins. They have taken this man's life away from him, and he's lost his family, he's lost his children. Relationships with his children have been strained. Has had to bear the reputation of being Malcolm X's killer. So I think that they need to do more. They need to figure out how to do more. And if they can't figure it out, you need to help them. That's by launching a civil litigation. Mr. Vance's reinvestigation, conducted with the Innocence Project and the Office of David Shannons, a civil rights lawyer, contended with serious obstacles. Many of those involved in the murder case, including witnesses, investigators, and trial lawyers, as well as other potential suspects, died a very long time ago. That's duh. Key documents were lost to time, and physical evidence such as murder weapons were no longer available to be tested. So this is what happened. This points to the truth that law enforcement over history has often failed to live up to its responsibilities, Mr. Vance said. These men did not get the justice they deserve. Well, thank you, Mr. Vance, the Manhattan DA, for stating the obvious. If you are looking to grow your money, please check out flynubianmoney.com. If you are looking to better manage your business, please check out flynubianbusiness.com. You can always find me, Mary Dean Esquire, here online at thewallstreetlawyer.com. And today we are talking about the two men who are about to have their convictions overturned tomorrow. The two men who were convicted of killing our dear beloved leader, Malcolm X. They're going to have their convictions set to be turned over on tomorrow. So let's get back into the story. A trove of FBI documents, including information that implicated other suspects and pointed away from Mr. Islam and Mr. Aziz, prosecutors pointed out. Their notes indicate that they failed to disclose the presence of undercover officers in the ballroom at the time of the shooting. So let me get this straight. There were undercover officers in the ballroom, undercover police officers in the ballroom at the time that Malcolm X was shot and killed. And this information never came out until now. This information was actually withheld. That brings us to a why was this information withheld? Why were there FBI informants in the ballroom? And why was this information with? I mean, when you connect those dots, I think that all of the conspiracy theorists who believe that this was a conspiracy set up and an inside job from the FBI and the police department themselves, it makes sense why this information was withheld. And the fact that this information was withheld definitely could have swung the jury, one way or the other. So let's get back into this. And police department files revealed that a reporter for the New York Daily News received a call. A reporter from the New York Daily News received a call the morning of the shooting indicating that Malcolm X would be murdered. So let me say that one more time. I'm bringing that back. The New York Daily News received a phone call the morning of the shooting indicating that Malcolm X would be murdered. So they got a tip off from the newspaper article that Malcolm X is going to be murdered. And come to find out that there were police informants in the Audubon ballroom. And this information did not ever come out until now. So I'm very happy that these brothers, that their convictions are being overturned, and one of the brothers is actually alive to see the day. But this just raises all kind of antennas about our judicial system, especially in light of the trials that are happening right now with Kyle Rittenhouse, okay, and Ahmaud Arbery's trial. So you wonder, what kind of justice are we really going to see for us in the Black community? So let's get back into this. Investigators also interviewed a living witness known only as JM, who backed up Mr. Aziz's alibi. This further suggesting that he had not participated in the shooting, but had been, as he said at the trial, at home nursing his wounded leg. Altogether, the reinvestigation found that had the new evidence been presented to the jury, it may well have led to acquittals. And Mr. Aziz, who is now 83 years old, who was released in 1985, and Mr. Islam, who was released in 1987 and died in 2009 at age 74, would not have been compelled to spend decades fighting to clear their names. This was not a mere oversight. This was not just a bad case, a bad day, a bad ruling on, whether or not a piece of evidence was. This was a complete setup that involved not only the police department, obviously, but it had to involve the judicial system. That's the only way they could have made such a gross error. The assassination. Let's get into the assassination. Okay. Wow. I can't. That image of Malcolm X is hard to watch. It's hard to see. It's hard to see. It is hard to see. It's heartbreaking to see Brother Malcolm laying there lifeless, like that. But it is important to honor him and see that this man gave of himself, and he gave his life. He gave his whole life for the cause of his people. And he has advanced us all. And so, any moment that we can honor this brother and his contribution to the Black community, that is, we're going to take that time to do that. So I want everyone to drop their B1 and their Black Power fist in the chat, in honor. Show me your fist in honor of our brother Malcolm, because he gave his life. He gave his life. That man gave his life. So let's get back into the article and talk about the assassination, some details of the assassination. The assassination happened on in February, obviously, at the dawn of what was to be a new phase of Malcolm X's career as a civil rights leader. He had introduced himself to the American public 6 years earlier, a Nebraska born street hustler turned minister, speaking forcefully on behalf of the Nation of Islam, the Black nationalist group, about the way that white authorities abuse their power and brutalize Black people. I say that to say, I mean, and then victimize more Black men by jailing the wrong men. I digress. Some of his ideas espoused during his time in the Nation of Islam, he called white people devils. You all know this. This is not news to you. He called the white people devils and advocated racial separatism. Were outside the mainstream, even by today's standards, but not by B1 standards, not by how we do things on B1, because this is Black Nubian Queen Network, the network for melanated people like you. And because we are the home for intelligent Black people, we we get Malcolm. We love Brother Malcolm. But this article, this is the story as reported in the New York Times. So let me get back into it. He called white people devils and advocated racial separatism. These ideas were outside the mainstream even by today's standards. The news media, which was then mostly almost wholly white, and it's getting a little better, but come on, portrayed Malcolm X as a racist and a dangerous agitator and referred to the nation as a cult. But he was also a person of intense fascination, a fiery and persuasive speaker who voiced ideas that many Americans had never heard before. And in 1965, a year after having left the Nation of Islam, he was beginning to define the mission of a new group, the Organization of Afro-American Unity, the subject of his planned speech at the Audubon Ballroom. But shortly after he began to speak, he was attacked by 3 gunmen who rushed the stage, firing at him in front of his pregnant wife and 3 of his daughters and killing him. Malcolm X died at the tender age of 39. 39 years old. I'm so humbled because I turned 40 this year. This man died at 39. Picture of the Audubon Ballroom. Okay. Mr. Halim, then known as Talmadge Hare, among other names, was apprehended in the ballroom after being shot in the thigh. Mr. Aziz, then known as Norman 3X Butler, was arrested 5 days later, and Mr. Islam, known as Thomas 15X Johnson, another 5 days after that. Within a week, the 3 men, all members of the Nation of Islam, had been charged with murder. At the trial in 1966, prosecutors cast Mr. Islam, who was once Malcolm X's driver, as the assassin who fired the fatal shotgun blast. Mr. Halim and Mr. Aziz were said to have followed close behind, firing their pistols. 10, they found 10 people who said they'd seen Mr. Islam, Mr. Aziz, or both. 10. Where did they find these 10 witnesses? How much did they pay these 10 witnesses? What did they do to these 10 witnesses? These are the kind of questions that I have. These are the kind of questions I think that everybody has, which is why this case was reopened, and not only reopened, but these 2 brothers having their conviction overturned. Okay. Because the witness statements were contradictory and no physical evidence tied Mr. Aziz or Mr. Islam to the murder or even the crime scene, for that matter. Clutch my pearls. Oh my gosh. But both men offered credible alibis, which were backed by testimony from their spouses, friends, and others. And when Mr. Halim took the stand for the second time during the trial and confessed, he insisted that his 2 co-defendants were innocent. How how did this happen? They wanted this to happen. They wanted these men to take the rap. That is so obvious. On March 11, 1966, all three defendants were found guilty and a month later sentenced to life in prison. Even then, evidence was already pointing to another theory of the case. Mr. Stevenson, who has spent much of his career fighting against wrongful convictions, said the assassination of Malcolm X followed 3 years later by that of Martin Luther King Jr. I couldn't imagine being alive back then. Traumatized Black people in the 1960s. But finding the truth never seemed to be a priority for law enforcement and the government. This is why they say all Black people have PTSD. This is why they say we need healing in the Black community. We need true healing. And everybody in the Black community who was alive at that time, who was going through the civil rights movement, who were a part, my father, a part of the generation who was bussed in to integrate schools. All of those people are completely traumatized. My generation, is the children of those children are traumatized. So this is something that, the fact that this one man is being released from prison at the age of 83, I don't know if that is enough. It feels like someone that's throwing me a bone. I just don't know if that's enough. That don't sit right with my spirit. Some more. There needs to be more retribution, but I digress. But finding the truth never seemed to be a priority for law enforcement and the government. And do you expect your enemy? Do you expect your enemy to want the truth to come out? No, because if the truth came out, it would probably come out that they're the ones that are guilty. Okay? Wednesday's acknowledgement, he said, just underlines how casually and recklessly these cases were investigated and ultimately concluded. It undermines already tenuous and fragile confidence in the rule of law to protect Black voices that were challenging bigotry and discrimination, said Mr. Stevenson. And it also just represented a continuing problem with reliability and fairness. And those are the problems that we are still reckoning with today. And I just wonder, as I sit here and think about Rittenhouse case, I have some lawyers, we're going to dissect this on Friday. But I just wonder, will those white woman tears save Rittenhouse? Ooh, but I'm on another subject. I digress. Some of the evidence that appeared to exonerate Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam, these two wrongly convicted brothers, emerged during their trial. But because key information was withheld by the authorities, again, let me run that back. Because key information was withheld by the authorities, its significance only became clear later. One defense witness, Ernest Green, testified that he had seen the man with the shotgun and described him as dark-skinned, stocky, and sporting a deep beard. A poor match for Mr. Islam, the man who was cast in the role by prosecutors, who was light-skinned, lean, and clean-shaven. This brother is light-skinned, light-skinned, clean, and clean-shaven. I can't say that right. I can't say it right. They didn't get it right, so there you are. The man that they described was dark-skinned with a big woolly bull beard. Sounds like someone completely different. But, they say we all look alike anyway. How convenient. Back to this article. But Mr. Green's description matched another man, one whose name that jurors did not hear. The name of William Bradley, a member of the same Nation of Islam Mosque in Newark, New Jersey, as Mr. Halem. Mr. Bradley was an enforcer for the Nation of Islam, which Malcolm X had joined in 1952 and promoted unceasingly for a dozen years before an acrimonious break the year before the assassination. He was less than 6 feet tall, weighed 182 pounds, and was dark-skinned, just like the eyewitness said. He had been a machine gunner in the Marine Corps, and his criminal history included a charge of possessing an illegal weapon. The description of Mr. Bradley was in FBI files at the time, at that. And Mr. Halem even identified him as one of the assassins. Even Mr. Halem, Mr. Halem, the man who confessed, who said that the two men were not guilty, that the two men were innocent who were wrongly convicted. He identifies the man who he said was the shotgun man. This man has a description on file with the FBI. I wonder why they did not listen to to Mr. Halen back then. And the authorities were aware that the Nation of Islam was targeting Malcolm X. A week before the assassination, his house was firebombed while he slept inside with his wife and daughters. This man truly gave of himself. But it would be years before the connection to Mr. Bradley became more clear, or can I say corroborated by everyone else that the FBI had to, that the evidence it just could not be refused. As a succession of amateur investigators, journalists, historians, biographers, and others took up the case. It was irrefutable evidence. One of the most important of these civilians was Abdul Rahman Muhammad, and I'm probably butchering his name. So if you want this full article, I am reading this as printed from the New York Times. One of the most important of these civilians was Abdul Rahman Muhammad, who hosted a Netflix documentary series early last year, Who Killed Malcolm X, that again assembled the case for these two men's innocence and others' guilt. Upon the release of this series, Mr. Vance announced that he would take up the case. Mr. Vance is the DA for the Manhattan DA. The reinvestigation was underway when a new biography was published, The Dead Are Rising by Les and Tamara Payne, which identified Mr. Bradley as one of the assassins. So everybody is putting out their own evidence. You got civilian journalism going on here. You got people, historians, journalists, biographers, everybody, people who are producing documentaries. Everyone is pointing, even eyewitnesses, everyone is pointing to Mr. Bradley, who could have been speculated an FBI informant. So the book, The Dead Are Rising, written by Les and Tamara Payne, which identified Mr. Bradley as one of the assassins. That book won a National Book Award last year and a Pulitzer Prize this year. So I want to pause and say, if you are looking to grow your business, please check out flynubianbusiness.com. If you're looking to manage your money, please check out flynubianmoney.com. You can always find me, Mary Dean Esquire, here online at the Wall Street Lawyer, at the wallstreetlawyer.com. And don't forget, if you're looking for some knickknacks, paddywhacks, give a dog a bone, we have plenty of merchandise that you can find on shopfnq.com. So let's get back into this. I hope that you understand that by telling your own story, these people, Les and Tamara Payne, I don't know if they are black or white or whoever told the story. I didn't Google them. I Googled the other people. Let's see what they are real quick. Les and Tamara Payne, who wrote the book, The Dead Are Rising. Let's see here. Okay, the book has come up, The Dead Are Rising. I love that name, The Dead Are Rising, because yes, okay, yep, these are a black man and a black woman. And they wrote the book, and their book got a Pulitzer Prize. And I pause to say that because there is honor in telling your own story. There's honor in telling the story about your own historians, that you cannot expect someone else to tell your story for your heroes any better, not better than you, because they don't love Brother Malcolm like you do. Malcolm was not fighting for them. Malcolm fought for you. Malcolm fought for me. Malcolm fought for us. And so as we honor Brother Malcolm, these two people, Les and Tamara Payne, who also identified Mr. Bradley as one of the assassins, their book won a National Book Award last year and a Pulitzer Prize this year. I feel that I was able to get some semblance of justice for Brother Malcolm X and his family, first and foremost. And second of all, justice for these two men, Mr. Muhammad said in an interview on Wednesday. It means that my life mattered, that I contributed to the betterment of society and making our country a better and more equitable place. Bill Burleson, a co-executive producer of the series, said he hoped The exonerations would prompt Congress to seek answers to questions about the federal government's role in the case. It brings us closer to understanding the mishandling of the prosecution. But the question still remains why those responsible were not investigated and prosecuted, Ms. Payne said of the review. Mr. Vance investigators working with Mr. Islam and Mr. Aziz's lawyers examined the evidence that had long been laid out and poured over publicly, including the FBI file on Mr. Bradley. Mr. Bradley, who changed his name to Al Mustafa Shabazz, died in 2018, and his lawyer denied that he had participated in the murder. Oh, wow. They even show his picture. Let me show y'all his picture. So this is the guy that everyone has said in the book murdered Malcolm X. And let's see. Who fit who fit the description for the person who they believe to have murdered Malcolm X. But this is this man. Years after the assassination, scholars suggested William Bradley, an enforcer for a Nation of Islam mosque in Newark, was likely the man who fired the fatal shotgun blast. East Orange Police Department. So that's who he is. Let's get back into the article. Okay, the Burroughs files contained a report stating that officials in New York had not been told that Mr. Bradley was a suspect, as well as an informant's secondhand account that Mr. Bradley was the shotgun assassin. The panel also interviewed a new witness and reviewed reams of records, public statements, prosecutors' files, court transcripts, and documents generated during the initial investigation, grand jury proceedings, the trial and post-conviction appeals. And one of the most significant weaknesses in the government's case, the review found, was Mr. Halem's confession and his assertion that his co-defendants were innocent. And he points to Mr. Bradley. I mean, the most significant weakness, the strongest. Come on, how did they miss this? Because they wanted to. Although all three defendants were members of the Nation of Islam, prosecutors failed to draw any connection between Mr. Halem, who attended the mosque in Newark and said his co-conspirators were from New Jersey, and Mr. Islam and Mr. Aziz, who attended the Nation's Mosque in Harlem. Two different states, two different mosques. It's kind of like gang member set, but they lumped them all together, but they weren't even in the same set. Several defense witnesses said Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam were home at the time of the murder. While most of the people the review panel sought to interview were dead, a witness who initially came forward at a screening of the documentary offered an account that seemed to confirm Mr. Aziz's alibi and had never been heard by the authorities. The witness, identified as J.M., said he was handling the phone at the Nation's Harlem Mosque on the day Malcolm X was killed when Mr. Aziz called and asked for the mosque captain. They hung up while J.M. went to find the captain, and then J.M. called Mr. Aziz back on his home phone, and Mr. Aziz answered. This was not back when they had call forwarding. This was not back when you could forward your home phone number to your cell phone. This is not back even when they had cell phones. So if he called him at home, that's because Mr. Aziz was at home. Lies have been shattered. Representatives for the two exonerated men said that moment meant a lot to Mr. Aziz and to Mr. Islam's family. But Mr. Shaney's, one of the civil rights lawyers representing them, said their convictions had a horrific, torturous, and unconscionable effect that cannot be undone. And not just on the family of these two men, but also on the Black community as a whole. The two men spent a combined 42 years in prison, with years in solitary confinement between them. They were held in some of New York's worst maximum security prisons in the 1970s, a decade that bore witness to the Attica uprisings. Take a breath. If you are looking to grow your business, please check out flynubianbusiness.com. If you're looking to better manage your money, please check out flynubianmoney.com. You can always find me, Mary Dean Esquire, here online at thewallstreetlawyer.com. Mr. Aziz had 6 children at the time he was convicted. Mr. Islam had 3. Both men saw their marriages fall apart and spent the primes of their lives behind bars. Even after their release, they were understood as Malcolm X's killers. Could you imagine how they were ridiculed in the Black community, having to wear the scarlet letter of being the killers of Malcolm X? This is how they were treated. It's a wonder that they didn't get off in prison. How I can't even imagine how this affected their ability to live openly in society. It affected them in every way you could possibly imagine, them and their families. In the final episode of the documentary series, Mr. Muhammad, the host, asked Mr. Aziz to sign a petition asking the Manhattan District Attorney to review his conviction. Mr. Aziz obliges, but says that the 20 years he spent in prison has erased his faith that his name would ever be cleared. So there you have it. I want to know how you feel. I want to know what does the emotion that this bring up to you. I want to know how does this make you feel? It makes me feel like while justice may have been done, and while I am always an optimist, I have to say I feel like this was just a little too late. And I know that these men have already lost their entire life, that they have lost the entire time that could have been spent poured into their families. I can't imagine the effect that being behind bars for the murder of one of our most beloved leaders in the Black community, what that has done to them and how hard that it's made their life and their time in prison. And let's at least we not forget, only one of these men lived to see their name being exonerated. The other man was not so lucky, having passed away while he was still in prison. So I ask you, is the conviction being overturned enough for the Black community? Is it enough for their family? Is it enough for them? I think they should at least sue and try and get some coins as well. But I don't know what kind of money will compensate me for my lost time with my family. There's not a dollar amount that can compensate me, not just for the lost time with my family, but my youth, my whole life spent behind bars. There's not any amount of money that would compensate me. So I don't know. I don't think this conviction is enough. I think they deserve more than a conviction. And I don't even honestly know what that is or how to make that happen. But if you do, I want you to drop that comment down in the chat, and we'll all see what we can do. We're all soldiers in this army. We're all doing what we can when we can. And this is me, Mary Dean here, Esquire, at the wallstreetlawyer.com, coming to you live on Fly Nubian Queen Network, the network for melanated people like you.